Hello and welcome to this session all about what it's like to be a freelancer in museums and heritage. This session will discuss how to succeed as a freelancer, the key skills and experience you'll need, and what to consider in order to find out whether it's right for you. I'll just highlight right now that we have a session on museum freelancing again on Sunday based on the Museum Freelance report. So I'm sure Louise will share the link to that, but just to highlight that there is more to come on this very important and very big subject. Our panel today is Claire Adler, Heritage Consultant for Community Development and Learning, Kristina Dziedzic, Independent Curator, Visiting Guest Researcher, Centre of Museum Studies, University of Oslo in Norway, and PhD candidate, School of Museum Studies, University of Leicester, Nicky Boyd, Museum Consultant in Audience Research and Evaluation, Jamie Taylor, Curator, Copywriter and Creative Producer, and Paddy McNulty, Director of Paddy McNulty Associates for Culture Heritage Museums Consultant, focusing on strategic development, business planning, partnerships, workforce development, and research and consultation. So that's a lot of strings to everybody's bow there. So you'll get some fabulous advice and experience today, I think. So thank you very much to all of you for being here today and for joining the Fair Museum Jobs Summit. I thought we could start the session by moving around each of you in turn, and if you could just outline a little bit about how and why you became a freelancer. And I will start with Christina because you're the first on my list.
Great, thank you. Hello, everyone, and thanks to Fair Museum Jobs for organizing this panel and the whole summit. It's, I think, very timely and very important, especially right now. I've largely done freelance curatorial work, mostly because there were just projects that I wanted to do, and it just sort of was in a lot of ways very happenstance. I'm not sure I'm the best example because I didn't really have a clearly laid out path or a very well organized consultancy business. I am originally from the United States, but I moved to South Korea over 10 years ago, and it really worked out better for me to do freelance work in that context. I should also say I sort of go in between the museum cultural heritage sector and academia. So I've also taught at university art history and museum studies and writing. So I think the flexibility and independence of doing projects as I wanted to or as they arose appealed to me, and I could do that in between my teaching schedule. I mostly have been sort of finding funding for projects. Right now I'm curating an installation by a Korean artist duo at an art space in Tanzania. And it was just a project I came up with these artists, and then we got funding from a foundation in Korea for it. So that's largely how I got started and why.
Thank you very much. Claire, would you like to go next, please?
Okay. The reason I became freelancer is because I hated working in institutions. I was rubbish at it. I'm always in conflict with the management and all sorts. And I didn't really like 9 to 5. It was just not the way I've been brought up. So I've been freelance for the last 16 years now. When I had my first child, it was the perfect excuse to leave Hackney Museum, which I'd set up, and move into freelance. I'd already done a bit beforehand. So it was the fact that I knew I needed the independence. It suits my personality. And I love freelancing. I've got a very small brain that can just scatter around between different ideas the whole time. And I love the fact with freelancing that I spend half my time working in museums, the other half of my time working with communities. And this is how bad I am at maths, and the other half of my time working for an LHF as a mentor. So I just work in lots of different ways, and that's what I enjoy about it.
Thank you very much. Jamie, would you like to go next, please?
Yeah, okay. Hello, everyone. So it sounds like I've probably been freelancing a little bit less than everybody else. So I've been freelancing since May last year, so just over a year and a bit now. And I started freelancing because my contract was coming to an end. It was a fixed term contract. I was looking around for jobs. I'd had a few interviews. Nothing really came up. And just more and more people who I spoke to suggested freelancing. They thought it would kind of work out for me, and they thought I'd be good at it. And I kind of looked into it, and it was something I'd never considered before, as it's I've always been very kind of institution based. The security of a job has always been really important to me, but the more and more I thought about it, and the kind of the possibilities and the adventure of it all, really, the more and more I just kind of thought, well, like, that sounds brilliant. That sounds really good, you know. And if I'm not going to do it now, like, when am I going to do it? So yeah, I kind of just sort of jumped in, really, and have been giving it a go for the last year or so.
Thank you very much. Nicky.
Great. Okay. Hello, everybody. So for me, I was actually working in a museum, and I'd already started thinking that I wanted to work for myself. And the stars kind of aligned, and I had the opportunity to take voluntary redundancy. So I kind of took it, jumped on it, and took it. And that was 20 years ago. And I've never looked back. A bit like Claire, I think. I just don't, in an institution, I'm bored. I don't feel like I'm challenged enough. All of those kind of things. I want to be my own boss. I wanted to manage my own time. So yeah, I mean, at the time, people were friends and family were slightly horrified. Like, what are you doing? Leaving, you know, you have a full-time job. And I just thought, no, this is what I have to do. And it's been the best thing. You know, there's challenges, but overall, I'm much happier working freelance. So it kind of really suits me. I can challenge myself. I'm always learning. There's much more flexibility. I'm definitely not a 9-to-5er. I travel a lot, so I can take time off to travel. Well, obviously not this year, but usually. So yeah, so that was my route, really. And I'm doing something freelance. So I specialise in audience research and evaluation. And it's not something that I really spent a lot of time doing. When I trained as an archaeologist, and I was actually doing exhibition project management in museums. So it's quite different, really, from what I was doing. But yeah, I found it. I'm passionate about it. So that's my route to freelancing. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And last but not least, Paddy, please. Oh, you're muted. The classic.
You might be the first one to do it.
No.
Hello, everyone. Yeah, so I've been freelancing in my present kind of freelancing role since 2010. Before that, I also used to be an archaeologist for a while, and I'd ended up doing some community archaeology freelancing, running education sessions, but that was more of a sideline. But I'd had a taster of how it worked a little bit. So in 2010, going back in time to the last financial crisis that we had, with the bonfire of Quangos, they made all the MLAs closed down, and it was basically my daughter's first job was on the way, and I was like, what am I going to do? What am I going to do? And I could see all these like 12-month contracts, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to try and freelance. So I kind of fell into it a bit, and it was partly to do that it suited the idea that I could share childcare with my partner. It suited the idea that I was a bit bored working with people, that I'd constantly be told that I'm not the greatest person with authority, because I like to challenge it a bit and not always toe the party line. So I tried it out, and yeah, and it's been good. There's ups and downs, like people say. It's very good for the flexibility. It's very good for the different projects that come up. It's interesting times, and you can kind of get a lot from that. So yes, I'm still here 10 years later. I feel like a bit of an old lag when I've been doing it for 10 years, but it's all right because Nicky and Claire are here, so they beat me.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you. One of the questions that I'd set to you beforehand, which has definitely been a theme of many of the questions that we've had from Eventbrite, is what practicalities do you think anyone starting out as a freelancer needs to know, and what do you wish you knew when you started? Would anyone like to leap in? Paddy?
Learn how to say no quite fast. Don't take on the world. I mean, the mistakes I made. So the first contract was really poorly paid for far too much work, and I didn't properly assess it. I shouldn't have, like, you need to sometimes step back because you're just like, oh, it's my first contract. This is great, and you're really happy. But actually, the brief was really unclear. They wanted more than they can deliver in the price range, and so it's a very practical thing. It's just like I should have stepped back and gone, actually, I've sort your day rate out and sort what's practical. And then as you grow in time, you need to learn to say no a bit. So, you know, if someone says, can you do this for this much? You say, not really, because that's not enough days. Or sometimes you need to learn to be confident and challenge people about their brief as well. To say, oh, I think that you really want this, and this really helps. So it just, to me, it's confidence as well. There's I could go on a whole list of practical things as well, but I think that's what I should have learned first, because I spent 2 years saying yes to everything, and it got very stressful until I learned actually you need to kind of look after yourself as well as look after your business.
Yeah, I bet. Sorry, Nicky. Yeah.
No, I was just going to say, I mean, I've got a whole list of things, practical things that I might, you know, save to a bit later. But I think the key thing was when I took voluntary redundancy, the museum I was working with, they had a really great package where I was able to work with somebody on my strengths and weaknesses. And so I could see my kind of transferable skills. So I understood much better what I was good at and maybe wasn't so good at as well. And I think that really set me in good stead, because I think the first couple of years when I was freelance, I did try quite a few different things. So, you know, I didn't kind of automatically start doing evaluation and audience research. So I did some interesting projects, you know, with around writing online resources, which I was terrible at. I did some outreach work with people who were terminally ill. I wrote interpretation plans and education plans, and I also did quite a bit of tour guide leading in the Med. So I tried a few things, and I think that really helped solidify what I felt I was, where my skills lay, because it wasn't, you know, then I sort of started doing more and more evaluation and audience research projects, and it kind of sort of fell into place. So I think what I think I wish I'd known, well, I kind of sort of did, but it just sort of happened that I was able to do some work around my strengths and weaknesses. And I think that's always a really good place to start, because you kind of get stuck in things a bit when you're doing a role in an organisation, but you need to think more widely to, you know, where your strengths are, I think. And that really helps you think back where you might go with it.
And actually Museum Freelance have got, or Christina at some point, Kristina Leicester of Museum Freelance had a really good evaluation sheet that she has distributed, which makes you stop and think about every project you do to work out what you enjoyed, what you didn't enjoy, whether you take that job on again next time. And in theory, I do it after every project, but I don't. But it's a useful tool for thinking about whether actually this is the right job for you.
And just one thing is I think someone at the beginning said to me, right, don't be afraid of doing things you don't think you know how to do well. So they said, step back and say, like, you normally, when you're in an institutional role, you have your role and your job description and things like Nicky said, you kind of fall into it and you just feel like you're doing it. But then if you can pick those apart and you can say, I've managed projects, I've managed budgets, there's teams, I've done contracting, procurement, I've done research, I've done evaluation. They're not necessarily all the major aspects of your institutional job role. But then when you step back, you can think, actually, I've done loads of transferable skills. And that's a really important thing to self-reflect in a positive way and realize what you can do.
And also those skills are transferable outside museums. I now do a lot of work with hospitals and health organisations, because the skills I've got can help them in the development of projects and delivery of projects as well.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear from Jamie as someone who's just at the sort of not the beginning of that journey, but much earlier on. I'd like to know if you've had any of that epiphany process about honing in on the things that you've.
Yeah, well, I think that I'm getting there. So I think for me, I'm come from an exhibitions background. That's what I'm good at, and that's what I'm wanting to freelance in. So when I started freelancing, the idea was that I would research, I would do interpretation planning, I would do text writing, I'd do exhibition project management, almost, you know, what I was doing in my kind of full-time job. I have done some of that, certainly kind of early on. I've done some really nice bits and pieces of that I've really enjoyed. But I think the pandemic has been really interesting in the sense that of people pausing and having a bit of a think about what museums of the future could be, what museum practice could be. And, you know, I've done that myself. So that's been one of the really, I think, really nice things for me about freelancing, is that I've been able to reflect on that, and I've actually been able to put some of that, some of those ideas into practice. I've been able to reflect on what I really want to do rather than what I have been doing. So, for example, I want to work much more with community groups. I want community groups to be part of shaping that, and I want to take museum stories out into places that are outside of the institution, that are relevant, that are kind of part of their lives. And I think if I was in, you know, any of my previous roles, I wouldn't have been able to kind of pivot that quickly. So, sorry, I've gone a little bit away from the question, but certainly in terms of things that I wish I'd appreciated a little bit more when I started, I think the importance of networks. So I definitely thought that I had a strong and kind of big network when I left. I soon found out that it wasn't nearly big or strong enough. But also being realistic about the financial implications of starting freelancing. You know, it's like kind of any other business. It's going to be tough to begin with.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll add to that also with this idea of a network, because I really developed my freelance work when I was living in Seoul. And then I had done my previous graduate research in Kenya. And so I was sort of in between those two places doing a lot of work, and my networks are really largely based there. And I moved to Norway a little over a year ago. So in some ways I'm really starting over, because especially with the pandemic, now I can't travel. And it's, you know, so my networks in Korea and my networks in Kenya might as well not exist in a lot of ways, although there is, I think, some spaces opening up for more online and virtual work. But as an arts and exhibitions background, I have to say I'm very resistant to virtual exhibitions. I just don't find them as satisfying. They're not as satisfying curatorially. I don't feel like they're as satisfying from an audience perspective. So yeah, I think in terms of a network, and when you're starting out, it's very important to make sure you have connections, not just for finding and doing work, but I also think in terms of a support network. While I also love the freedom and flexibility of freelancing, and as Claire and Nicky said, I never loved the 9 to 5, and you know, I appreciate not being an institution, especially since I've moved to Norway, and through the pandemic, I realized it can be very isolating. So when you do start out and you're on your own, I think be very mindful of what do you need for support. And, you know, I like to work alone, and I'm in a lot of ways an introvert, but I've recognized that I kind of need conversation with other adults during the day. And so I think really like think about that. You know, what will you do in your day, and who will you talk to, and what are your support networks, both work-wise and personally?
And one of the ways of doing that is actually finding other people locally who also are freelance. They don't have to be museum workers. I have a regular Monday morning coffee with a group of friends every Monday, well, apart from during lockdown, but it is that kind of thing of those networks that you would have had at work. I think it's really important to make sure you've still got them going on in some form when you're freelancing.
Yeah, those casual conversations, you know, in the coffee room or by the copy machine, you know, I always knew they were valuable, but I think I didn't realize how valuable they were until I didn't have the opportunity to have them anymore. And I think there's also a lot of idea generating that goes into that, and a lot of informal collaborations that occur in a workplace. And so when you're freelancing and you're on your own, you know, particularly if you don't, I've been looking into sort of a shared office space kind of situation, so that I get out of the house more, and it's not possible at this moment with restrictions and social distancing. But I do think it's important to consider, where will you work? How will you work? You know, what will you do during the day? You know, that's so having coffee with friends or other people working similarly is a good idea, but it's important to consider those things. And I definitely didn't when I moved here. I just thought, oh, I've been freelancing for a while. I got this, and it's just a completely new, it's a new place. It's a new world.
Thank you.
Sorry. I was just going to quickly say, when I started off, I was working out of I had a 1-bedroom flat, and I was working out of my lounge. And that very soon became quite difficult, as you can imagine. So I think if I'm starting out now, I would hire a space as cheaply as I could somewhere else. So I had my own space, the way I could shut the door at the end of the day, because it's very difficult when you're just in your lounge and all your work is sitting in one side of it. So maybe then it might have been quite hard financially, but I think actually it would have been quite beneficial to have a space that I could go to. So I think that's really, and a very good office chair is very important.
Yeah, just the space thing is quite challenging generally. I mean, I ended up utilising the services of the reading room of my local archive and local history library, which they didn't really mind because I bumped their numbers up because I used to come in every day. But I needed to get out of the house, and I needed that sometimes that physical change of environment. So I think it's important you find that space, and I don't think there were any hireable spaces in my little tiny town of Hertford where I used to live. There probably is now, but and Claire, I think about the kind of and the loneliness sometimes of being a freelancer. I think that's the thing that I missed, was that the coffee chats you'd have around the table, or sometimes that opportunity to sometimes just turn around and say to someone when you're working on a piece of work in office, is this completely rubbish? Am I being completely nuts here? And they normally turn around, unless it is rubbish, but normally they go, it's not, but actually just look at this. So it took me a few years to kind of get confident in that. So I have to thank AIM for its Enablers project, where they sent us off for a few days during a year with other freelancers. And that helped build some networks, but just for the couples. So now I know one freelancer I can actually phone up, and there's no judgmental. I'll be like, oh, is this a really nutty idea? How's this looking? And they'll be like, they'll just tell it like it is, like you would do at work. And that's a really important network to develop, but it takes time. So, it's just something to be aware of.
And in the same way, I now actually work with other freelancers. I worked entirely on my own, but now I work far, far more with sort of about 2/3 of my work is actually in partnership with other freelancers. So I've got a couple of freelancers in particular that I work with. And that makes me so much happy, because you can go, was that me, or was that meeting utter bleep? Go, yes, it was. You go, oh, phew, it wasn't just me.
Yeah, I think everybody this year has probably noticed the absence of those coffee conversations almost in unison. I know I have. And I think also learning about having to work in your living space as well, of course. And so if you're somebody listening who found that fine, or you found strategies to get through it, then maybe you're already on the way. We've had quite a lot of questions about networks, actually. So I'll read one of the ones from Eventbrite, because I think there's possibly a little bit more to say here in terms of this person has asked, what advice would you have for freelancers who are just starting out without the benefit of years of experience and building contacts during that experience? So what would you suggest, Nicky?
I would definitely suggest getting involved in organisations and getting on committees. I think that's one of the best things I did. You're giving off time for free. You're meeting really interesting, inspiring people. You get a bit more of that networking, sort of chatty, and you're doing something positive. So I would definitely, that really worked for me, just getting on committees and giving your time, and then you get a lot back.
Thank you. Jamie, did you have your hand up next, Jamie? Sorry, I thought no.
Oh no, I can talk about it if you like.
No, we'll go to Claire, because Claire did speak. I just thought I noticed that a hand went up. Apologies.
What I was going to say was I was very lucky, because I left not long after I'd set up Hackney Museum, so I'd already had a reputation, and also was asked by an LHF to apply to be a mentor. So having those two elements of networks worked really well for me. It's very different from when you start from scratch, and I think that would be quite hard, and that's to do with applying for jobs that are coming up. But I think it is definitely easier if you've got a reputation behind you, which isn't the positive answer you're looking for, but I think it is a lot harder doing it without a reputation.
But we're looking for truth, not just positivity. We want people to know what the truth is. So that's really helpful. Thank you, Claire. Jamie, did you want to add something?
So in terms of like my networking, I went to actually just a lot of non-museum networking events. So there was, where I was based in Newcastle, there were just a lot of free breakfast networking events, which before I went freelancing, I did not think I was the kind of person that would ever go to a breakfast networking event, but they were, it was very kind of hit and miss. Some of them were great, some of them weren't. I met a lot of really interesting people at them. I met a lot of really boring people at them, but they were just good in terms of, you know, I made 2 or 3 good connections there that kind of led me to go to other kind of events and interesting things and meet other interesting people. So I would say in terms of networks, look beyond the sector as well. So I'm quite kind of active in the copywriting, Twitter, for example, sort of sector and things like that. And that network's been really good as well. So
thank you very much.
I'll just add to that, sort of pre-pandemic, but also as able to during the pandemic, depending on the level of infection rates. I have also been trying to attend relevant, maybe not museum relevant, but just relevant to my interests, workshops. So there's an organization in Oslo called Diversify that focuses on immigrants and multiculturalism in Norway. And they've offered several kind of entrepreneurial type of workshops and various topics that I've attended and used that as an opportunity to meet people and network. So I would say just try to find, you know, kind of whatever seems relevant or at least interesting as a way to meet people and sort of put yourself and establish yourself as in that community.
Thank you very much. The next question I have comes back to something that Paddy mentioned earlier on, which is that we all know that, well, generally good freelance work hinges on a good brief, a well-made brief, and these are also notoriously variable and not always well-made. And I'm saying that as somebody who's definitely sent out poorly made briefs in my past, so apologies to the world of freelance. What should new freelancers or freelancers at all be on the lookout for as a sign of a good or a bad brief? How do you know? How can you tell? What should they look out for?
Well, I can mention a couple of things. I think what things that put me off. I think one of the main things is when you get a brief that doesn't have any idea of budget, and you can't, whatever you do, you can't seem to get any idea of the budget. And to be honest, I wouldn't bother, because to do something worthwhile, you've got to know that kind of have a ballpark figure, I think. And then the second thing that really puts me off is a very complicated submission process. You know, when you have to go through one of those sort of strange kind of websites, so that you go into the black ether with all this stuff, and actually that really, there are quite a few barriers to people who are sole traders, freelance, I think, with some of those processes. So sometimes I think you might be missing some good people and I know it's not always every organization's choice how they put things out, but I think for me those are the two things that kind of flag up it's a bit of a red flag, and I probably, if I can't work out with what the budget is and kind of try and persuade the organization to share, I probably wouldn't bother.
Yeah, to add to that, I recently, and I don't remember exactly even, I look at so many but there was one that it was clearly not for large organizations. They were clearly looking for just individuals or small groups. And there was a requirement for some kind of insurance I didn't even understand what it meant. And I was like, I clearly don't have that and don't have the means to get it as an individual. And even though I thought it was a really good fit for my skills and my experience and my interest, it was just that put me, I actually, and then I emailed the contact to inquire about it and didn't get a response. So I thought, well, then that's just, I'm not going to bother with that. I think if people aren't responsive, if there's an email to ask questions, they should respond to the emails. And if there's no email to ask questions, then to me, that's also something that's very off-putting. If I can't contact you ahead of time to inquire about this, I think it's not worth the time.
And I think, yeah, I would completely agree with you, Christina. Anything that, if you don't understand their brief and then you can't get hold of, or you automatically then try and talk to them to get an understanding of it. If you still haven't understood the brief at the end of the conversation, it is not a project worth going for. They don't know what they want. Therefore, you won't get it. It will be a disaster. We all have many projects behind us that have done that. But if you can't understand and they can't understand what they want, then they need to just go away and start again.
Yeah,
indeed. You want to go next, Paddy? I think you'd. Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
I'm agreeing with what everyone says. I think there could be a whole afternoon, day on how briefs are written, good, bad, and horror stories. I mean, this is when I said learning to say no. I suppose it's about being toughening up. I've got to the stage now where you sometimes contact people and you very politely say, I very sometimes write, dear so and say, oh, I can't appear to see the budget in the brief. I was wondering if you could give me a ballpark figure. Of which say, oh, we don't publish the budget. We want to have a fair competition. It's just like my reply has been like, would you apply for a job you don't know the salary? No, you wouldn't. So I'm not applying for a piece of work if you don't tell me how much it's worth. And then I will politely explain. It's like, we work out day rates, we have insurances, we have different things, we have other projects. Actually, if the brief wants the moon on a stick and it's got a budget accordingly and a time frame, then yes, maybe we're interested. If the brief wants the moon on a stick and it wants it in 4 weeks' time at £50 a day, then it's not worth anyone's while. That's a bit of the extreme. But so I think that's, from a commissioner's point of view, that's really important. And from a freelancer's point of view, be wary of those things to be wary of. Short deadline tenders probably means they've got someone in mind, don't really bother. Bit different at the moment, I know, with the Cultural Recovery Fund, but normally in more stable times, if it says you need to make a response within 5 days, I would approach with caution, but with a lot of caution. Or the bizarre things in your experience. I can do that, I can do that, I can do that. Must have in-depth experience or in-depth knowledge of the history of Wolverhampton Football Club. I've seen things like that, so it's just like, that's definitely going to their mates. I'm just telling you how it is. I mean, those things, don't even bother to waste your time. And be sometimes wary of being used as quote fodder. Local authorities particularly. Sorry guys, I've got lots of love for you, but your procurement rules are a bit rubbish. I used to work for you, and you've got to be a bit wary of being invited to quote for things that you're not going to have a chance getting, but they need to get their 3 or 5 quotes in. There's a whole afternoon that we could really go in and open up to people about what goes on. But on a positive note, I would say a well-written brief knows what it wants. It knows how long it's going to take approximately. It's realistic. It has a realistic budget that appreciates that you're not a salaried member of staff, as in when you work out the pro rata, when you work out the yearly annual salary, you're not going to get paid the same as the officer in the thing, because you appreciate that you're paying your own on costs basically. And that has an email address or telephone number that is open and friendly and responsive. And there are some really good people. I mean, I've had some great conversations that said, call for a chat, and you phone up, you have a lovely hour chats with them, and you really get an understanding of what they want. So there are good stuff out there.
Thank you very much. Thank you. That was very useful to me. I've also have worked in a local authority context and done tenders from a local authority museum, and it's painful. And we've definitely lost people through things around the insurance. That's happened way too much. It's very frustrating.
Very quickly here.
Yes, please.
When I used to work in local authority, take your procurement people out for coffee, take your finance people out for coffee. Those insurance rules can be bent. They can actually waiver them. But you just need to if you're an employee, build a really good relationship with those people within your first few weeks. That's what I always did when I worked for a council, and you get a lot further. So it can.
Can I ask how I mean, as a freelance curator, I've just not had to deal with that. And the other sort of large museum project I did in Kenya also wasn't relevant. How do I get insurance? Like, I didn't really understand that process.
There are several really good providers out there that are reasonably cheap now as well.
But what are we insuring? That I don't break something? Or I just didn't understand it at all.
Got professional indemnity that is your insurance against saying something really stupid, basically, that you get sued against. And the other one is public liability, and that's if something happens that someone will get hurt. But yeah, there's
I mean, it can be. It's quite good value now, like Claire said. Yeah. I think I probably pay for both of those about £35 a month.
Yeah.
Okay.
I pay 25.
I'm going to email Claire for a suggestion.
I think,
I pay £16.99 for mine.
Oh, never mind, Jamie.
I think with the professional indemnity,
it's not too much, is it? It's not to be covered. It's not too bad.
Yeah. And I found with its professional indemnity levels of insurance in the UK anyway, that it's the one that local authorities struggle with a lot. They set it really high, and that's only because their procurement people are used to dealing with multi-million-pound contracts.
I remember it being 5 million plus or something, and that's really crazy.
It's just you need to have that's why I was joking about get one of the officers in procurement on your side, because when you can explain it to them and you say, look, the contract value is £6,000, they're not going to tell us anything about rerouting the services or lose you loads of money if they mess it up. It's basically what will happen is everyone will just get a bit grumpy for a few months and it'll be fine in the long run. And once that's explained to procurement, they normally can waiver that or change it. So I've had that with the county councils. One of them I got my insurance company to write a letter saying they did not believe the level of insurance being asked for was realistic or appropriate for the level of contracts the local authority was publishing. And they were just like, oh, okay, that's fine. But
yeah, no, I've queried it a number of times going, really need £5 million worth of insurance? I'm only saying you need to do a family event.
Yeah, the project I was looking at was something, it was over £5 million, I remember. I just thought, okay, that makes sense. Thank you. That's very helpful. I'm
sure it will be helpful to everyone listening as well. So thank you very much for adding that. Incredibly, we've only got 20 minutes left. So how's that happened? So I'll move on. So this is one that's definitely come up in the chat here. It certainly came up in the Eventbrite questions. This is around pay. So the museum freelance report really underlined for me, and I'm sure everybody, how much receiving a fair fee for fair work can be a major issue for freelancers. It's an endemic problem in the sector, and it's particularly difficult for freelancers, I'm sure. How would you make sure that you
started, I was told by another consultant who's more well established, and I thought it was quite good. He was like, you're going to spend a third of your time chasing. There's not, a third chasing, a third networking, a third working. It's a bit rough, but basically her point was, it's not like a salaried job where you're going to spend all your time working and then you go home. So she was talking to me about, you've got to set your fee appropriately to cover those bits that you're not going to be working, because you're still actually in a way working. You're doing your admin, your project management, you're drumming up business. So be aware of that. So don't work out your annual salary of your last job, divide it by a load of number of days, and then add a bit and think that's okay. Think about that as well. And also, I think one of the important things is she luckily told me, it's like, on your first few jobs, don't price yourself so cheaply that it becomes difficult to dig yourself out of the hole of being the cheap option. Because actually, set a price that's fair and reasonable, that covers your costs and gives you an excess for reserves. So you are a business, and profit is not a dirty word, because profit doesn't necessarily mean loads of money in the bank like we think about. It just means setting aside money within your business accounts so you can weather through high periods of high demand and low demand as well, if you think about it. So a fair rate, I think.
So I would
go, Jamie.
Sorry. I would do your research as well, to look around at the resources that are about day rates and some of the work that people like Museum Freelance have done. And also just not be afraid to ask other people who are doing similar things to you. You know, how much do you charge for this, or how much would you charge for that? And to be confident about it as well. To really look at kind of how much you think that you're worth. I'd maybe even take that figure and add 50 quid to it, but then be really confident about talking to that about other people, about telling them, you know, that's your day rate.
Yeah, I think I think that kind of there used to be, I wish I could remember it, there was a website ages ago, and probably someone might know, it used to set out the day rate that you needed to charge to get an equivalent salaried rate.
Yeah, I've got that. So I've got that actually. I can find that.
And it wasn't necessarily.
I can put my hands on it right now.
Yeah, it didn't equate to the same amount. It was saying if you took on all the on costs of your, so for instance, you know, when you're in a salaried job, you've got 13% national insurance paid for by your employer. You've got office costs, so you've got all your computers, your training, your wear, your pension contributions. You're actually indemnified against lots of other stuff that you have to pay. All those things, and so it works. And that I wish I knew what it was, but that's quite useful, because actually when you put in salaries of things actually for day rates, I think it was like for about a £30,000 job, the day rate was about £350 or something like that. Which then people go, oh, that's quite a lot. It's not really, because you're not going to be working 212 FTE days, full-time days, sorry, on that rate at all. So that's useful to know. And like Jamie said, be confident about it. Remember that the commissioner is under pressure to save costs, unless it's March, where they're normally under pressure to flush their budgets. Yeah, but at the beginning of the financial year, everyone is under pressure to cut costs. By the end of it, everyone's under pressure to flush their budgets. So, but if you're confident, say this is it, this is the rate, and you know, for this you get this much experience, this much, and I will do this for you.
And also the reason they're going out to a freelancer is they've got skills they want to plug.
Yeah,
there's something missing in their organization, which means they're saying we need to get somebody else in to do this for us, and that is where you come in, basically.
And also I think it's important to make sure you join and support kind of relevant organizations and bodies that also, you know, share good practice more widely, especially, you know, around freelancers. So for obviously the Freelance Network, there's the Museums Association, Group for Education and Museums, the Visitor Studies Group, all kind of do that, you know, on behalf of you, are putting forward good practice around that. So I think it's important to be part of those organisations and make your voice heard, and then collectively it's a bigger voice.
Thank you. Yes, we would agree at Fair Museum Jobs. That's something that we like to do too, to amplify other people's work as well where we can, and to work as a group to improve things. Ariel's made a really great point about by lowballing your fees, it undervalues the work everyone does in the sector. We should all be pushing to bring everybody up and make sure that everybody's paid a fair wage for fair work. That's the most important thing. Sorry.
Oh, very quickly, there is, you can see it in some elements. I mean, I don't mean to diss education consultants because my partner is one, but the education consultancy day rate is unsustainably low for a full-time job. I think for anyone in a real estate, if you've got any responsibilities, it might be all right if you've not got the responsibilities of mortgages and kids and whatever, and dogs and stuff when you're older, or if you're starting out and you can be a bit more, you can move around the country more and stuff like that if you have a fixed thing each month. And I think the problem with that is, I think that what happened is it was a race to the bottom at one point, and it's got there to about the £150-200 a day mark, and it struggles to get back up. It's never managing to get it up, and that's why there's a responsibility, I think, as freelancers and as new starting freelancers, to set a fair and reasonable day rate, so actually the freelance sector doesn't collapse into low pay by mistake.
Which also means as well that the more senior consultants have a responsibility to make sure that any projects that you're writing, and I've had discussion with somebody about this recently, that they ensure that there's a decent pay in there.
Yeah.
Because there are too many projects that are sent out that don't have a decent pay. It comes from two ways.
Yeah, and there's a responsibility of the funders as well to do that as well. I mean, anecdotally been told of clients being said, well, just stick £150 a day in for them, someone will take it. And I'm like, that's come from a funder to a grant. It's like, that's not right. That's not a fair rate.
No, definitely not. Definitely not. So sort of along those lines then, we've still got a total of 13 minutes. I wonder if we could talk about what happens when things go wrong and the client relationship breaks down. I wondered if you could share any advice or wisdom, or maybe even about mitigating that if you haven't really experienced those things so much.
I can just say something about that. Early on, I had a project that went a bit south. I think the problem, looking back, the client thought I was doing one thing, I thought I was doing something else. We just hadn't, the brief just was not clear enough, and we hadn't really agreed it and discussed it. I think that was the nut of the matter, really. But moving forward from that, I think, things don't all, things can sometimes be a bit tricky, but I think I've learned negotiating skills. I suppose that's what I would say. So it's about kind of there being some compromise, some flexibility, and discussing solutions. I think always, turn it so there's some look at the positives. So how, this isn't maybe going quite as we thought. How can we make that better? So, I think it's not a case of just walking out, slamming the door. Obviously, I've never done that, but I think it's about it. I suppose it's about communication, and both sides can come from a place where that's a good thing to do, and work on making it better.
I again haven't had anything. Well, I've had one that fell apart, and that was when I was working for a major funder, and I was a mentor for a project, and we didn't get on very well, and it ended up with me just going, well, look, I can't work with you, it's not working. And I walked away and said, I don't want to be paid for this. This hasn't worked. I got a great comeback email which sort of said, well, you may not be very good at your job, but I'm going to pay you anyway, which was just fabulous. But it hasn't affected my relationship with the funder, who was actually my employer rather than the project. But generally, there are some projects that you work with where you don't find the people as easy as other projects. And I think that's just part of being a freelancer, and it is sucking it up, basically. You're there going, okay, well, I won't be going back to work for them a second time, but I really, really want to make sure that this other organization really understands how much I value them. And
I think most of the projects I've worked on, I find there's been probably a couple that have been really quite difficult. And it's quite difficult because you don't know each other. It's like anything, you're trying to build a relationship with these people. And basically you've started off, particularly if they're longer term projects, and sometimes you just have to acknowledge the fact that you might not like each other. You've met, you've had a couple of dates, it's not working out. but normally you still struggle on with the relationship until there's a natural conclusion. But yeah, you can, and there is that being, talking to each other, communicating, being honest, saying, I don't think this is working. And sometimes toughening it out. I don't think I've ever walked away, but I've had, sometimes, particularly when there's external funders involved, you can sometimes kind of go slightly higher up and just say, I think we just need a bit of an intervention here. And it normally transpires that either they have completely different ideas what the project is, even when you've submitted your proposal and you're going back to the project plan. But talking is probably the key thing. I think accepting that some people's working styles can be more aggressive than others. I'm just thinking, and that they'll be like that with their staff and in the organization, and they'll be like that with you. There's nothing you can do to change that sometimes.
Yeah, also going along with working styles, I think my personal pet peeve is when there's a lack of attention to details. And I haven't had any relationship completely break down, but my own personal trigger is when people don't read emails and then they think that I haven't said something or given them something, and it's like right clearly there in the email. And I've had to work out how I respond to that without just forwarding them what I've already sent, like see below, because that doesn't make anyone feel very good. So that's, and for me, it's been helpful to just remember, like, well, everyone's busy and that person might have read my email while something else was going on. And just, it takes 2 minutes of my time to just kind of repeat something quickly in a polite way and, and then move on. I think so. I've much like personal relationships, I've just had to work on my own self and how I respond to some of those things.
Thank you. Thanks. There's actually a question that follows on from that from Siobhan in the chat saying, is there a trade union branch or mediation support for freelancers? No?
Museum freelancers is the close we've got, and that's just the wonderfulness of Marge and Christina who've set it up in the last few years. And that's made a huge difference, the fact that there is an organisation that you can actually have a chance to chat with other people, but there's no trade union.
Thank you. So we've just got 5-6 minutes left. I wondered if we could finish up by each of you in turn saying any advice that you would give to somebody, or in fact anybody here today considering going freelance. Anyone want to start? If not, I will just move around.
I don't mind. I'll start.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, so I've got a whole list of things really, but I think one of the key things is, as an evaluator, make sure you know what success means to you. So really think about that at the beginning, when you're setting off, and that may change over the years. But is it about being challenged? Is it about a better work-life balance? Is it about developing professionally? It may be all of those things, but I think just every so often kind of mindfully think, what does success mean to me? And yeah, that can change, but I always find that a useful thing to come back to every so often.
Thank you. Claire? No, Paddy, sorry, you're about to speak. Sorry.
I suppose I think that I agree with Nicky. I think one of the most difficult things as a freelancer when you're working from home for yourself, and Nicky said about the work in the lounge type thing, is, and I've terrible at this myself, as you fall into the trap of not taking time out for yourself in the normal way that you would do in a normal job. So if you're commuting into your job in town, for instance, if you're doing a public transport, you might take out time to read a book for half an hour, and you will take a lunch break unless you're under the cosh. Hopefully you should do if you're being a good workforce organisation, and you need to do that. So remind yourself, so make time for yourself during the day. If it's going for a run or going for a bike ride, taking the dog for a walk, take advantage that you are in control of your timetable. So I'm a morning person. I'm not really an afternoon person, so I will do more in the morning and less in the afternoon. Some people are different. I know people who love working later at night and they're terrible in the morning. Work to your strengths, and remember it's something that you control, and then take that as a real positive thing for you as well. So you can enjoy your life and enjoy your work.
Thank you very much. Claire, would you like to go next?
I would completely agree with that, is the fact that it is up to you. I had some practical things, and that is that you need to make sure you've got some money in the bank. It's really boring, but the cash flow is the biggest problem of being a freelancer. Sometimes there is no money coming in for several months at a time. You're still working your butt off, but there is no money in the bank at all. You need to have some money cushioned for you to fall back on, basically. And the other one that I do is put aside 1/3 of every paycheck that comes in that goes directly into my tax account to pay for the tax man and also all my training, so that I know that I can always afford to do training and marketing and things, because I've got an account which has excess in there. And it's so automatic now that I don't even think about it when it comes in.
Can I say something really quickly? This is for new freelancers. Okay. You mentioned tax, Claire. That's really important. When I first started in my first year, did not realize about payment on account. They will stiff you for 6 months worth of tax on your first tax return in advance. So based on your previous, so be aware. And so suddenly my tax bill was thousands more, and they're just like, well, we need it. And I was like, but I've only got a week to get it. They're like, well, pay. So I had to basically, all that little extras I built up went, so be aware of a thing called IR35 as well, which is working when you're not really a freelancer, but the tax thing is important. 30%, that's exactly what I do.
Thank you. Jamie?
Well, I think a lot of people have echoed a lot of the things I was thinking of, particularly around tax. I would say when you're thinking about freelancing, to look at the really kind of positive parts of it, look at the really exciting parts of it, to have that confidence in yourself that you can do it, and to kind of dream big and to think of all those possibilities. But also I would look at the other side of it, look at the difficult side of it, the side about making money, the rejection of it all. There's a lot of rejection that goes into freelancing, and to really be honest about weighing those two sides up, both the good and the bad. And if you can deal with that kind of potential loneliness, if you can deal with that rejection, I would say certainly that those difficulties of getting going, freelancing is going to be great, but be honest with yourself when you are considering that.
And the other one I'd add to that one is people don't say thank you. And it's really depressing how few thank yous you get. You deliver a final report and you never hear anything back. And that hurts at the soul. You've just spent the last 6 months working your butt off, sorry, I keep saying that, working really hard to deliver this, and they don't say thank you. And as Jamie says, it's part of their going, okay, that's fine. That's just part of them.
I think for me, I found it actually quite dispiriting trying to get in touch with people, or putting bids in for things and just not even getting a response saying, thank you, we've got that. So there's a lot of little dispiriting things in freelancing. There's a lot of big dispiriting things in there. But then on the other side of the coin, there's some really great things in there, some really things, already that I'm really proud of doing.
Thank you. I think getting back to candidates seems to be a problem across the board again. So there's a lot of things our sector can do better. Christina, would you like to go last, but not least?
Well, I don't have a lot to add, but I agree with everything everyone said. The first thing I had jotted down on my notes for that question was "be intrepid!" 3 exclamation marks. I think, as Jamie said, it is really important when you're starting out to weigh those negatives. I mean, I'll just say right now, if my partner didn't have a stable salary, I would not be making a living. And like I'm in a transition, I'm moving somewhere else. I'm finishing my PhD right now. So, there's circumstances for it. But I have to remind myself of those circumstances and remind myself that, the money I have coming into the bank right now is not a measure of my worth. And, I think that's just important to sort of remember that. And as Jamie also said, there's a lot of rejection, and try not to take it so personally. So my second piece of advice that I wrote was be intrepid and have a thick skin. I mean, really just recognize that every bid and every project is about fit, and just because you're not chosen, it just wasn't the right fit. I like Paddy's analysis an analogy to dating. Like, you wouldn't date every person you meet, right? So you're not going to work with every organization, and they're not every organization is going to want to work with you. But then when you have been at it for a while and you find these partnerships that really work and are very rewarding, and you do things that you're proud of, then it's definitely worth it. But it takes a while, I think. And I guess my final piece of advice would just be patient. Keep at it.
Thank you very much. Well, we're dead on time now. I think that's a nice note to end on, and I definitely think we could keep talking for the rest of today, if not the rest of this week. So thank you so much for being here. I hope that everybody found the session useful, at least as a starting point, and thank you so much to Louise for finding all of those links while we were talking. That was really impressive. So yeah, thank you so much for coming, everyone, and particularly to all of our speakers today. And yeah, thank you very much. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.